So I actually spent 1 hour today to make what I am now about to show you. So it's not something you cannot do. I know because I did it in 1 hour. But before we get into that, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about a word that is way more important than you may think. And that's the word private. And private doesn't mean personal. It doesn't mean individual. It doesn't mean that it's only for you. Private means private, and I'm going to talk to you about what that really means. Then, of course, property is also another word that is very much misused, and most people here in this country, they think it's about real estate. But if you put the word private and then property together, then you get something completely different. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about something called private economy, and that doesn't mean your finances. That's something completely different. So private economy is something else. So we're going to talk about that. Then, of course, we're going to look into what happens if we dare to think about our lives as if you're in my house, you follow my rules. And that might be very interesting, and that might bring us into some challenges with our in the big society. But we're still going to talk about that. And then, of course, in the end, we're going to talk a little bit about what does this mean to you, and does private and business belong together? Let's take a look at that. Sounds about fair? So let's give it a go. So this is where it all starts, and this might be very, very strange. But there's a reason why it actually says all roads lead to Rome, and just look it up. Look up where all the rules are made. Look up where all the decrees are made. And now I'm talking about the very decrees that all the world follows. Look up the source for that. And those of you that follow the news, you may have noticed that we now have 10 new commandments. There's way more than 2,000 years since we had the last 10 commandments. It's way more. You're talking about 3,500 years or something. You had 10 commandments. Now you have 10 new ones. Does it sound like a big event? Maybe we don't care. Well, it's just issued, and it's based on something called Laudato Si, and it's made by what is called the Pontifex, the bridge builder of the world, and it's the one that carries 3 crowns. So now you know where the 3 crowns are from. We're not going to talk about the 3 crowns today. There are many other places you can do that, but this hegemony of the triregnum, they invented something that is just fabulous. And that is that when you're born into sin. So they invented what in Norwegian would be called arvesynden. So you're born into sin, meaning you're in debt forever. So even by just being born, you owe someone something. Isn't that fantastic? Wonderful, wonderful. And then people believe in it, of course. And that's even more wonderful. So they feel alone, they feel, okay, so I inherited this, this caste or this serfdom or this slavery. There's really nothing I can do about it. I was born here, and I looked around and then said, okay, don't sit by that tree, that costs money. And don't chop wood because you have to pay for it. Don't drink of the water because you have to pay, and so on and so forth. So that's the system we've been living in for hundreds of years. I'm not going to say thousands because maybe not the timeline we've been told is actually quite correct. But it still is hundreds of years of hegemony that brings us into that we should be thankful that we're born into slavery, and we need to pay for it the rest of our lives. But if I look at this, I think my mind just tells me that, well, there might be an option to look at it very differently. It might be an option to say, this looks quite cozy. Lions walk with snakes, walks with horses, walks with, and they all seem quite fine. There's balance here. And if I, having my wisdom of being halfway through life, was born again today, I would wake up and say, oh, there's a lot of beauty here. Quite frankly, I believe I own part of all of it. Just as much part as anyone else in society and has been born before me. I'm now here, and I'm born free, and I'm here to walk the earth, breathe the air, carry fire, and heat my surroundings for what I need. And then, of course, I'm here to drink of all the water. And of course, it's free. I own just as much of a share of it as anyone else that was born. Doesn't that sound about right? We can choose to think about it this way. But I assure you, this way of thinking is way more prevalent than you think. It's not just like switched off. I assure you that all of us, immediately when we go out into big society, we're looking for, is that allowed? Should I be paying for this? Can I walk here and do this without paying someone? Do you see? So actually making this transition in our mind is way bigger than we think. And it's not so natural to do, right? But of course, if you do, you choose to stand like that. You say, I am born and therefore I have, like anyone else. Then you stand in what is called equity. Do you know what that means? It's not equality. Equity means you have a share of the whole. You have a share of the whole. And there's even a law in Great Britain that is called equity law. It's less and less used, let's call it like that. But it is a law that makes this principle that just by being there, you have a share of the total. And this means that if you go a little bit back in history, you will find this, but we could still choose to treat our world as we are just as entitled as anyone else to share in the total. Of course, people will guard what is the being born in sin with arms. You know, they will guard it with the weapons. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the life of us changes if we decide to become and stand as sovereigns. No one to challenge our right of being. Does that sound wonderful? And you might say, oh, but that would never work in practice. Well, I have some news for you. There's lots of, even in this country, societies that live like that, more or less. Of course, they decide on their own rules and stuff like that, so there are still limitations, but they take that as for granted, that we're born, some call it in this guy's image or this girl's image or whatever, but you are created, and no man on earth created you, except for your mother and father, of course. They were part of it. So, but there are some examples. So, did anyone of you see some of the coverage of the Amish society in the United States? Did you see what happened? So, they were interviewed by, I think it was CNN or ABC or something like that. And then this guy was the representative, so he came up with his beard and his hat and his, and his cow was behind here and stuff like that. So it looked kind of cozy. And then the interviewer, the reporter, started asking, so what happened during this pandemic? He said, what do you mean pandemic? Yeah, this COVID-19 thing that, this coronavirus that went on. Oh, you mean that? No, we didn't have TV, so we never discovered that. And then she asked, yeah, but how have you been then? It must have been terrible. No, it's been amazing. We now have 4,300 people that never visited us, coming to us, signing an agreement that they're members of our meat-producing society, and they give us money every single month to produce something that is better than what they can get elsewhere. And he said, oh, but do you know how many weeks it took before FBI showed up at the store? Very shortly. So the thing is, but they still haven't been able to close them down. So what they showed is that it is a media crisis. It is We don't need to go into all that. But the point is, they just carried on as usual, did what they thought was right as sovereigns, and didn't even have the flu, right? So, and then of course, this is how they work. So if your house blows over, a new house is built, by next weekend, right? That's it. That's how they do it. Very hard for us to do it because we're all here as one, alone, a serf and a slave, right? They say we're not slaves. We do what we want to do, and what they want to do is to help the neighbor. They think that's a really good idea, and they don't think, how much do I get paid, and when should we? Oh, he works more than me, so he should get more. No, he works less than me, and stuff like that. So it reminds me of the. Let's stop there. So this is entirely out in the open, but of course they don't invite in people to discover what they're doing because they know what that means. They know that if they are better off, someone will try to close them down. That's how it happens. Now we also have some of the explanations of some of the richest, let's call it the most wealthy families on this planet, that also see it like that. They say, if we talk about that, they're going to be at our door and claiming that, oh, we did something wrong, or we don't have the right to do this, and stuff like that. And the only thing we did was to stand up as sovereigns a few generations ago. And then we just continued being that. And that brings way more security and way more wealth. And that's what this talk was about, right? Having said that, there's a choice and there's a mindset. And if we dived into that mindset, we could see things a little bit differently. So if we then look back at the private topic that we talked about, what is really private? So have you ever seen a letter abroad with private and confidential on it? Do you know what that really means? It's only privy to the one that is the addressee and to the sender. It's only between them. It's not any case of anyone else's. So what it then means is that private means I point at you and then we do what we want to. It's no business of anyone else. That's private. I say that what I do in my home is private. It means no one else has anything any say in it, right? It's only us that live at home. And then if you add confidential, it means that we decide not to share it even, right? So what's the opposite of all this? And this is where we go back to the born in sin topic. It is the legal system, the legal eagle, the Latin eagle. And it's the regal system, the regent eagle, the regus lex, right? So so if you see the two-headed eagles, it's the royal, the regal, and it's the legal. So those two systems together make up this what do you call it, born in sin system. I'm simplifying a lot, I know. But the point is the opposite of private is legal and the public. So public means it's displayed to everyone. Legal means it's not your privy to decide who is involved. It's a paper system where the papers decide and the law decides what you're allowed to do and not. Does that sound kind of like okay? So most of the things we deal with in this country and most countries are of legal nature. And when you say, is that legal? That's not the same as, is that lawful, for instance. So legal means specifically, is it something else than private and confidential? That's what, for all sakes and purposes, legal in this context means. So unless you can be private, how are you going to live as free and in abundance and feel you're a sovereign if you can't be private and confidential? And you know it's almost impossible, right? My phone, as I speak, it is recording everything we say. Your phone, your phone, your phone. All of it, of course. There's no real privacy and no real confidentiality here. But it's not what is done, it's what you can claim that is important, right? Will they come forward and say, we listened to you illegally, unlawfully, to your private conversations you had in private? That's very hard to do. Of course, they can use the information, that's something else, but they can't come forward and say that. Because then if they do, they are also violating their next of kin, their business, their privacy, okay? But here's the thing. There's one thing you can do. Nick knows this because we worked together for almost a year, and we spend hundreds of thousands. Yeah, I would even say a couple of million and more, 3-4 million. And we tried to develop a way to be sure that we could be privately confidential, only to discover that someone is way better at it than us. That's a very strange. So someone made something where you can be 100% private. You don't need to give any ID, no address, no email, no phone number, no face ID, no fingerprint, nothing. So you can be totally what is called pseudonymous, not anonymous. That's impossible on the internet. They will see that it's the same phone doing the same thing, you know, they will see that. Or not necessarily phone, but the same identifier. But they can't necessarily know who it is, which is very different, right? So someone made something where you can be absolutely pseudonymous and act out in the world and have friends, and no one will even know what you're talking about or be able to transcribe that.